After losing her husband, a 20-year-old widow and her 3-month-old baby end up on the streets. But what happens next changes their lives forever. Madison had always been a reserved young woman, shaped by a strict and controlling upbringing. She grew up in a household where appearances and social conventions came before any real displays of affection. Obedience was treated as synonymous with respect, and her opinions, when voiced, rarely held any weight. From a young age, she learned to swallow her desires, accept silence as an answer, and solve her problems alone. Working as an assistant in a small beauty salon, she nurtured hope for a different future, far from that cycle of demands and judgments. It was there she met Jason, a simple guy with an easy smile, dedicated, and from a humble background, something that immediately sparked her parents' prejudice. From the start, they made it clear how much they disapproved of the relationship. They said he wasn't the kind of man their daughter should be with. Arguments became frequent, judgments even harsher. Madison endured everything quietly. She hid the relationship, lied about their meetings, and accepted insults just to stay by Jason's side. When Madison found out she was pregnant, the world around her stopped for a few seconds. Sitting on the edge of the bed, holding the test, she took a deep breath, trying to process the news. Even though she was still young and full of uncertainties, she felt there a mix of fear and hope. For a moment, she imagined what it would be like to hold that baby in her arms. But that feeling didn't last long. She knew that sooner or later she would have to tell her parents. That night, after rehearsing her words many times, Madison entered the living room where her parents were. Her father, as usual, was reading the newspaper, and her mother, with a distant look, was sewing a tablecloth. "I need to say something important," Madison said, her voice low but firm. Her father only lifted his eyes over his glasses. "What now?" he asked impatiently. "I'm pregnant," she answered in a faint voice, but without looking away. The silence was immediate and suffocating. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Her father slammed the newspaper shut, throwing it on the table. "Pregnant?" he shouted, standing up abruptly. "You must be messing with me." Her mother, pale, stopped with the needle in the air. She couldn't say a word. She just looked at her daughter with a mix of shock and disappointment. "Who's the father? That no-future guy you've been seeing?" her father said, pacing back and forth in the room. Madison just nodded. "This is a disgrace to me, your mother, our entire family. You have dishonored this house," her father yelled, his face red. Her mother, eyes watering, murmured softly, "My God, my daughter." Without giving Madison a chance to explain anything, her father pointed to the door. "You're getting out of this house right now. Now, I don't want to see your face in here anymore." Shaking, Madison begged for calm. "Dad, please, let's talk. I have nowhere to go." "Your problem. You made this choice. Now face the consequences," her father said without a trace of compassion. Her mother, with tears in her eyes, simply lowered her head, avoiding her daughter's gaze. With her look, she confirmed her husband's decision. With a shattered heart, Madison packed a few clothes into a plastic bag, grabbed the little money she had, and left. At the door, she turned one last time, hoping to hear her mother call her back, but the silence was absolute. With nowhere to go, Madison went straight to the workshop where Jason worked. When he saw her arrive, he immediately sensed something was wrong. "What happened, Madison? Why do you have that bag?" he asked, dropping a wrench on the floor. "They kicked me out, Jason, because of the pregnancy," she said, her voice choking. Jason was in shock for a few seconds. "But my God, you pregnant?" he said, unsure whether to smile or cry. She just nodded. Without thinking twice, Jason pulled her into a tight hug. "We'll figure this out, I promise. This baby won't lack love." Their only option was the small room in the back of the workshop, where Jason sometimes slept during night shifts. The place was cramped, smelled of grease all the time, and had no comfort. But to Madison it was better than the street. The first days were hard. There was no space for the two of them. The mattress was old and food was scarce. Jason started working overtime to earn some money, and Madison, despite pregnancy sickness, tried to keep working at the salon for a few more weeks. But soon her body began to show signs that things wouldn't be easy. Dizziness was constant, her blood pressure frequently dropped, and sleepless nights became routine. Jason did what he could to help. "You need to rest, Madison. I'm here, you're not alone," he told her every night while preparing tea or fluffing pillows. Despite the hardships, there was affection between them. Small gestures like a folded blanket, a tired smile, or a quick kiss before heading to work were what kept their relationship going. But while Madison fought to keep the pregnancy, Jason also faced his own battles with his family. One afternoon, after a long day at the workshop, he arrived at the room upset. "My mum called me again," he said, throwing his keys onto the makeshift table. "What did she say?" Madison asked, worried. "She said you're deceiving me, that you're only with me out of self-interest, that this child is just an excuse to trap me," he replied, visibly shaken. Madison lowered her head. "I never wanted this, Jason. Never. I know. But she'll never understand. My brother joined the conversation too, said I'm ruining my life because of you." That night, after another argument over the phone, Jason made a decision. "I don't want any contact with them anymore. I'm tired of the insults. From now on, it's just me, you, and our child. That's it," he said firmly. Time went on, and Madison's health problems worsened. There were many hospital visits, tests, scares in the middle of the night. But Jason was by her side at every appointment, holding her hand, fetching medications when needed. The day of the birth arrived after a night full of pain. At the hospital, Jason held her hand as she battled through contractions. "Breathe, Madison. I'm here. Everything's going to be okay," he said, eyes misty. Hours later, the baby was born. A healthy boy with a loud cry. Jason's gaze as he held his son for the first time was pure pride. "He's beautiful, just like you," he said, emotional. The following days were a mix of exhaustion and happiness. The cramped room now had an improvised crib in the corner with old blankets serving as a mattress. But the joy was short-lived. Just 3 months later, fate struck Madison cruelly. Jason had an accident at work in the workshop. A part fell on him while he was repairing under a car. It all happened too fast. When Madison got the news, her legs gave way. At the hospital, the doctor was straightforward. "I'm sorry. He didn't make it." Madison's world collapsed. She wandered aimlessly through the streets near the hospital, baby in arms, not knowing what to do. In the days that followed, reality hit even harder. Without a job, no money, and overdue rent, the workshop owner soon asked her to leave the room. Desperate, Madison decided to try asking her parents for help. She walked to her old home, child in arms. When she knocked on the door, her father opened a crack, and seeing her there was blunt. "You don't have anything here anymore. Go away." "Dad, please. I just need a place for a few days. I don't care. You made your choice. Now live with it," he said, slamming the door in her face. Her mother appeared at the window and, in a low and hesitant voice, said only, "Don't come back, Madison. Please, leave." With her dignity in pieces, Madison decided to go to Jason's mother's house. She walked for miles, without eating, baby crying. When she arrived, she knocked hopefully. Her mother-in-law appeared with a look of disdain. "Well, look who finally showed up. What do you want now? Money? A place to stay? Well, you can go away. Figure it out yourself," she said coldly. With nowhere else to turn, Madison started living on the streets. She spent nights on park benches, wrapping the baby in rags to try to keep him warm. She cried silently so as not to wake him, asked for leftover food in small shops. Sometimes she got a hard bread, other times just a look of contempt. One freezing night, curled up in a corner of a park, a man passed by her. It was Brian. Without saying a word, he left a blanket and a package of bread next to her and walked away. Madison looked at the blanket as if it were a precious gift. It didn't change her situation, but it rekindled a spark of hope. In the following days, their paths crossed several times. Brian kept leaving small acts of help. A bottle of water, a piece of fruit, some used clothes, always discreetly without much talking. Determined to change her situation, Madison managed with much persistence to get a temporary cleaning job at a boarding house run by Helen, a woman with an unstable temper who lived between bursts of rage and moments of apparent calm. There, Madison met Sandra, a guest who soon showed herself to be friendly and attentive. Sandra seemed to understand Madison's situation, offering advice, lending things, talking during the nights. "You're strong, Madison. If it were me, I'd have given up already," Sandra would say, always with a knowing smile. But Sandra's false kindness soon revealed its true face. One morning, after days of saving every penny from her tight salary, Madison noticed that the money she had carefully hidden inside a can among her clothes was gone. Desperation took hold of her. She looked and searched the small room, emptied everything, opened drawers, shook sheets, but the money simply wasn't there anymore. The little she had managed to save vanished overnight. Heart-racing baby in her arms, Madison went to Helen, the boarding house owner. She knocked on the administration door, nervous. "Helen, please, I need to talk to you. Some money of mine disappeared, the little I had saved. I'm sure someone took it," Madison said, voice trembling. Helen, as always, was in a bad mood. "Do you have proof? Because no one here babysits anyone. If it's lost, that's your problem." Before Madison could continue explaining, Sandra, who was nearby and heard part of the conversation, appeared in the hall with crossed arms and a look full of fake indignation. "She's saying someone stole her money?" Sandra said sarcastically. "Funny, coming from her. Yesterday I saw her rummaging through another guest's things while everyone was in the dining room." Madison froze, unable to believe what she was hearing. "That's a lie. I never touched anyone's stuff," she said, voice shaking, face flushed with shame and anger. Helen, already annoyed with the situation and her usual unstable mood, cut off the discussion. "I don't want to know who did what. I'm sick of these stories. Madison, pack your things and get out of my boarding house. I don't want any more trouble here." "Helen, please, I didn't do anything." Madison tried to insist, but the decision was already made. With no way to defend herself, no proof, and everyone looking at her like she was guilty, Madison grabbed her few things and left the boarding house with her baby in her arms. Shame and the pain of injustice followed her out the door. The despair seemed endless. Back on the streets, baby in arms and dignity increasingly torn apart, she walked aimlessly along sidewalks, looking for some corner to sit and try to protect the boy from the cold that cut her skin like blades. The baby cried softly, fever burning him like fire. Madison barely had the strength to walk, and every step felt like a superhuman effort. That night, as her eyes began to droop and her body threatened to collapse right there, Brian saw her again. He was walking home carrying a simple shopping bag when he stopped upon recognizing the curled-up figure on the sidewalk, almost unrecognizable, pale, with sunken eyes. "Hey, are you okay?" Brian said, crouching beside her, visibly worried. Madison lifted her gaze with difficulty. Heavy eyes and pale face. She tried to smile but couldn't. She just murmured, He has a fever. I don't know what to do." Brian touched the baby's forehead and felt the alarming heat. He looked around, then at her, then again at the baby. He took a deep breath, clearly struggling with the decision he was about to make. "Come on, you can't stay here like this. Let's go to my place," Brian said, extending his hand. Madison hesitated. I don't want to be a burden." "There's no other choice. Look at you. Get up. I'll help," he said, already starting to gather her few belongings. With no strength to resist, she just nodded. Brian helped her up, and together they walked in silence to his house. When they arrived, Kimberly, Brian's sister, opened the door and frowned at the scene. "Who's this?" Kimberly said, crossing her arms. "That's the girl I told you about, the one I helped a few times in the park," Brian said, pausing before continuing. "On the way here, she told me her name's Madison." "And what's she doing here?" Kimberly said, looking Madison up and down. Brian took a deep breath. She needs help. She has nowhere to go. The baby's got a fever." Kimberly scoffed. "This is going to be trouble, Brian. Just saying," she said before leaving the room and slamming the bedroom door hard. Brian looked at Madison, who was visibly embarrassed. "Sorry about that, but don't worry, we'll take care of you," he said, leading her to a small couch in the living room. That night, Madison slept holding her son, her head resting on an old pillow, but for the first time in days, with a roof over her head. In the following days, tension was inevitable. Kimberly made it clear she didn't trust Madison. "How long is she staying here, Brian?" Kimberly said, scrubbing dishes with unnecessary force. "Until she gets back on her feet. I'm not leaving her and the baby on the street," Brian replied calmly. Madison did everything she could not to be a bother. She helped with household chores, cleaned what she saw dirty, cooked when she could, and left early to try to get small jobs in the neighborhood. One day, while hanging clothes on the backyard line, she overheard Kimberly talking on the phone with a neighbor. "What do you think? That I don't know she's here just to scam? Soon she'll have my brother supporting her and that kid. I'm not stupid," Kimberly said disdainfully. Madison heard everything but pretended not to. She just took a deep breath and kept hanging the clothes. Even with all the sideways looks, she didn't stop trying. She started washing neighbors' clothes, did small sewing repairs, and in her spare time, lovingly cared for her son. Over time, Brian began to notice details others ignored. One night, arriving home, he saw Madison silently cleaning the living room floor, the baby sleeping wrapped in a cloth nearby. "You should rest a bit," Brian said, stopping beside her. "If I stop, I start overthinking," Madison replied, not looking at him. Brian smiled softly. "You're stronger than you seem," he said before heading to the bedroom. Rumors in the neighborhood didn't take long to surface. Neighbors whispered on corners that Madison had pulled the baby scam, and that Brian would soon be supporting a woman he didn't know with a child that wasn't even his. One day, returning from the store, Brian overheard two ladies talking. "Poor Brian. He's going to end up raising other people's kids," one said. Brian clenched his fists, but chose not to respond. At home, during dinner, Brian told Kimberly, "People have been talking about me because of Madison." "And what did you expect? A woman who shows up out of nowhere with a baby, living here? Of course they're going to talk," Kimberly said coldly. "She's not what they say," Brian said firmly. Time passed, and Madison kept doing everything possible not to be a burden. She got a steady job at a local laundromat. The hours were short, allowing her to care for her son. Kimberly, who had always been curt, no longer showed the same hostility. Though still direct, her words were softer, and looks of distrust began to give way to a more tolerable coexistence. Upon hearing the news, Brian sincerely congratulated her. "I knew you'd make it," he said, while helping her pack some clothes for the new job. When she received her first paycheck, Madison began looking for a place of her own. She found a small room in the back of a simple house. On moving day, Brian helped carry her few belongings in an improvised cart. While they were settling in, Kimberly appeared holding a box. "Here, some plates, silverware, things you'll need," Kimberly said, handing over the box without looking directly at Madison. "Thank you, Kimberly. Really?" Madison said, touched. Months passed. Brian remained present. On weekends, he helped care for the boy, took him to the park, accompanied Madison to medical appointments, and whenever she had a problem in the new room, he was the one who showed up to fix it. Kimberly, despite her usual tough demeanor, began asking frequently, "Is the baby okay? Is he eating well?" News of Sandra's arrest spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. She had deceived other people, running scams similar to the one she pulled on Madison. Upon hearing the news, Madison felt a strange relief. For the first time in a long while, she felt some justice existed. The bond between Madison and Brian grew, but slowly and naturally. There were no impulsive confessions or sudden romance, just care and respect. One afternoon, while Brian was changing a burnt-out light bulb in her room, Madison said a bit shyly, "I don't know how to thank you for everything." Brian just smiled. "You're already doing it every day." Madison's son, now a toddler, began taking his first steps. He ran through the small house's halls, calling Brian with the same joy he called his mother. Kimberly, in turn, became a constant presence. Whenever Madison needed to study or work extra hours at the laundromat, Kimberly was the one who looked after the boy. 2 years later, Madison's life was different. She was enrolled in a night course to become a nursing assistant. The boy, now nearly 2 years old, ran through the rooms calling for Brian. One ordinary night, Brian and Madison, talking in the kitchen, made a decision. "Have you ever thought about us living together for good?" Brian asked, arranging cups on the table. Madison smiled gently but sincerely. "I have thought about it, but no rush. We're building this slowly, and I like it that way." Brian nodded. "Me too." And so, without grand promises but with a lot of truth, they decided to share the same roof. It was a partnership built with care, respect, and admiration. Kimberly, while still direct and not very affectionate, now cared for the boy with a tenderness she couldn't hide. The neighbors, who used to only criticize, began to respect Madison. "She's an example of overcoming. That girl has a strength we never imagined," they would say on the corners. Madison's parents never looked for her, nor did Jason's family. But by then, Madison no longer blamed them. She had learned to build her own life with her own hands, supported by those who truly chose to stand by her side. One quiet night, after a day full of work and study, Madison sat beside her son, watching him sleep. As she stroked his hair, she thought about everything she'd been through. The pain, the loss, the hunger, the cold, the humiliation. None of it would be forgotten. But for the first time, she was sure her story was only just beginning, and this time on her own terms. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.